Her mother screamed so loud it could be heard through the closed door. "Not her! Please! Take me instead!" Two men in uniform held the woman by her arms, while a third led a 15-year-old girl toward a black car. The girl didn't know where they were taking her, didn't know what she had done wrong, didn't know if she would ever see her home again. Her mother broke free and ran after the car. The girl watched her face through the rear window, twisted in a scream, streaming with tears. Her mother ran as long as she could. Then she collapsed to her knees in the middle of the dusty village road. The car turned the corner. They would never see each other again. The girl's name was... Actually, we'll never know her real name. She cannot reveal it, because then they would find her and kill her. Today she is known as Mi Hyang, the name given to her personally by Kim Jong-il. The dictator said her village name was unworthy of his palace. For the next 2 years, Mi Hyang lived in the most secretive place on the planet, in the personal chambers of the North Korean dictator. She saw things that never make the news, did things she still cannot speak about. This is the story of how an ordinary schoolgirl was turned into state property, of what happens behind the walls of Pyongyang's palaces when the lights go out and the cameras switch off, and of the price she paid for her escape. Warning: what you're about to hear may shock you. Friends, this story reveals one of the darkest sides of the North Korean regime, a system of sexual slavery that has existed through 3 generations of dictators. They turn teenage girls into state property. They break their bodies and souls. They destroy their families for the slightest disobedience. And they're doing it right now, as you watch this video. YouTube suppresses content that accuses active regimes of crimes against humanity. Algorithms don't promote truth, they promote entertainment. Only your support allows us to tell stories that need to be heard. Subscribe right now and hit that like button. It's a signal that the voice of Mi Hyang and thousands of nameless girls will not be silenced. Not by the Kim regime, not by algorithms. Ready? Let's go. An ordinary life. Mi Hyang was born in a small town in northern North Korea. She still won't reveal the name of this town. People she once knew still live there, and she doesn't want to put them in the regime's crosshairs. Her family was ordinary by North Korean standards. Her father worked at a state factory. Her mother taught at the local school. Mi Hyang had a younger sister, a little troublemaker who was always borrowing her things and tattling to their parents about everything. An ordinary family in an extraordinary country. Although in North Korea, the very concept of ordinary means something completely different than in the rest of the world. From early childhood, every citizen of the DPRK is taught that they live in paradise on earth, that the capitalist world envies their happiness, that the great leader Kim Il-sung and his son, the dear leader Kim Jong-il, are living gods who personally care for each of the 25 million North Koreans day and night. Every morning at school, children bowed to the portraits of their leaders. Every evening, families thanked them for the food on the table, even when there was barely enough to quiet their hunger. North Koreans knew no other life and couldn't imagine one. To them, the world beyond their borders was a dark, hostile place full of suffering and poverty. Mi Hyang was 15 years old. She was a good student and dreamed of becoming a teacher like her mother. She had friends she would giggle with during breaks, discussing boys from the other class and dreaming about the future. She was an ordinary teenager with ordinary dreams. Everything changed one spring day when the door of her classroom opened and 2 men in military uniforms walked in. The selection. The teacher stopped mid-sentence. She went pale, as if she had seen her own death. And perhaps she understood exactly what was about to happen, unlike her students. The men were middle-aged, around 40, maybe older. Their uniforms displayed badges no one in the room had ever seen before. Special badges indicating membership in the leader's personal guard. The men didn't introduce themselves. They simply stood by the blackboard and began silently surveying the class. One of them slowly walked along the rows of desks. He stopped at each girl, leaned in, studied her face carefully. Some he asked to stand. He would turn their chins, examine their profiles. He asked one to smile so he could check her teeth. When he stopped in front of Mi Hyang, she felt her heart drop into her stomach. His gaze was cold, appraising the way you look at a horse before buying it, or a piece of meat at the market. "Stand up." She stood. Her legs were shaking so badly she was afraid she might fall. The officer examined her from head to toe. Slowly, thoroughly, missing no detail. Then he wrote something in his notebook and nodded to his partner. "Sit down." Out of 32 girls in the class, they selected 6. Mi Hyang and 5 of her classmates were led into the hallway, where they were asked strange questions. About their families, about their grades, about their health. Any chronic illnesses? Any mentally ill relatives? Then one of the officers looked Mi Hyang straight in the eyes and asked, "Have you ever been with a boy?" She was 15 years old. She understood the question, but couldn't believe an adult man in uniform was asking a schoolgirl such a thing in front of everyone. No, she managed to say, feeling her cheeks flush with shame. "Never kissed? No one has ever touched you? Answer honestly. We'll verify it anyway." She shook her head. Beside her, one of the girls was sobbing. "Good. Go home and wait. Not a word to anyone about what happened here." She waited for a week, the longest week of her life. Mi Hyang couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Her parents walked around grim and silent, but explained nothing. They clearly knew something she didn't, knew in and were afraid. And then a black car with tinted windows came for her. The examination. The girls were brought to an unremarkable building somewhere in Pyongyang. Gray, concrete, no signs or identifying marks. Inside, it smelled of bleach, medicine, and fear. There were about 20 girls from all over the country, all roughly the same age, in 14 to 16. All frightened, all unable to understand what was happening or why they had been brought here. They were taken to separate rooms, ordered to undress completely. Mi Hyang will never forget that moment. She stood naked in the middle of a room with white walls, while 3 adults, 2 men and a woman in a white coat, looked at her and wrote things on forms. The woman approached and began the examination. She checked the skin, looking for scars, moles, any imperfections. Made the girl open her mouth, inspected teeth and gums. Raised her arms, looked at her armpits. Felt her neck, checking the thyroid. Then the woman put on rubber gloves and said, "Lie on the table, spread your legs." What happened next, Mi Hyang doesn't describe in her interviews. She says only that on that day she understood. Her body no longer belonged to her. It had become state property. And the state had the right to check its property for suitability. Out of 20 girls, 8 were rejected. Some for a scar on their back, some for being too tall. Kim Jong-il didn't like women near him to be taller than 165 centimeters. Some for unsatisfactory results from that particular examination. Mi Hyang was deemed fit. She was told she had been granted the greatest honor. She would serve the dear leader personally. She should be proud that the party had chosen her. She didn't feel proud. She felt like a piece of meat that had just been weighed and priced. Training. For the next 6 months, the selected girls were prepared for their new life. They were housed in a closed compound somewhere on the outskirts of Pyongyang. Leaving the perimeter was forbidden under penalty of death. Contacting their families was strictly prohibited. They had effectively died to the outside world. Their old names were no longer used, in only numbers. Every day, from 6 in the morning until late evening, they learned. Traditional Korean dances and modern Western ones, folk songs and the leader's favorite compositions. How to walk properly, smoothly, silently, gracefully. How to bow properly, deep but not servile. How to pour wine properly, so that not a single drop would spill. How to give a proper massage, shoulders, back, feet, head. They were taught to anticipate their master's wishes before he spoke them, to smile even when they wanted to cry, to be invisible until called upon, and completely present when needed. There were other lessons, too. These were conducted by an older woman, a former member of the Pleasure Brigade, retired due to age. She explained things that 15-year-old girls shouldn't know, showed them things they had never seen and didn't want to see, taught techniques that made some girls cry into their pillows at night. You must be ready for anything, the instructor said. The dear leader may want anything, at any time of day or night. Your only job is to give it to him, with a smile on your face. One girl dared to ask, "What if we don't want to?" The instructor looked at her with a long, cold stare. In North Korea, there is no word "don't want." There is only the word serve. Remember that if you want your family to stay alive. Here, you don't just answer for your own mistakes. 3 generations of your family answer for them. No one asked any more questions. On the last day of training, the girls were lined up. Each was given a sheet of paper with printed text. It was an oath. I swear to serve the dear leader with body and soul. I swear to keep the secret until death. I give myself to the party without reservation or regret. At the bottom was a space for a signature. Sign in blood, the officer ordered. Each girl pricked her finger with a special needle and signed in her own blood. At that moment, they ceased to belong to themselves forever. First meeting with the leader. Mi Hyang awaited her first meeting with Kim Jong-il in terror. In her imagination, he was something between a god and a monster. An all-powerful ruler before whom the whole world trembled. A man who could destroy anyone with a flick of his finger. Reality was almost disappointing. The girls were brought to one of the leader's many residences, a luxurious palace drowning in gold and marble. Crystal chandeliers the size of cars. Carpets so thick your feet sank ankle-deep. Paintings in gilded frames. All of this was so far removed from the gray poverty in which the rest of the country lived that it seemed like a hallucination. The girls stood in a row, dressed in identical traditional dresses, hanbok, waiting. Minutes stretched like hours. Then the door opened, and he walked in. Mi Hyang expected to see a giant, a demigod, a superhuman from the propaganda posters. Instead, she saw a short, heavy-set man in his 60s with a ridiculous perm. His face was marked with brown age spots, exactly like her grandfather's. His teeth were yellowed from years of smoking. He walked with a slight waddle, like someone who spends too much time sitting. He looked like an ordinary neighbor, Mi Hyang would say years later in her interview. All my fantasies about the great leader shattered in that moment, like glass against concrete. Kim Jong-il slowly walked along the line of girls, stopping, examining faces. He lifted one girl's chin to study her profile, told another to turn around. When he stopped in front of Mi Hyang, she caught the smell of expensive alcohol and French cologne. "What's your name?" he asked. She said her name, her real village name. Kim frowned, as if he had heard something unpleasant. "No. From today your name is Mi Hyang. Your old name sounds too rustic for my palace. Forget it." And so she lost the last thing she had from her former life, her name. Life in the palace. For the next 2 years, Mi Hyang lived in a world that ordinary North Koreans don't even suspect exists. Kim Jong-il had numerous residences throughout the country. Official palaces in Pyongyang for receiving foreign delegations, country villas for relaxation, hunting lodges in the mountains, and special places, secret residences that even high-ranking officials didn't know about. One such place was the underground residence. One day, the girls were put into cars with tinted windows and driven somewhere outside the city. Then the cars entered a tunnel going underground. They drove in complete darkness for 40 minutes. Mi Hyang timed it. What she saw at the end of the journey staggered her imagination. There, deep underground, hidden from satellites and prying eyes, was an entire palace. Game rooms with pool tables and arcade machines, a cinema with a huge screen, a swimming pool 50 meters long, luxurious bedrooms with beds the size of small rooms, banquet halls that could hold 100 guests. At the bottom of the pool was a mosaic portrait of Kim Jong-il, so the girls literally swam over their master's face. Mi Ok, the girl Mi Hyang shared a room with, whispered to her, "This is a special place. Only the general and we come here. No one else in the world knows it exists, not even his generals." Mi Ok was a favorite. She had served longer than the others, and Kim clearly singled her out. Sometimes she was summoned to the leader's chambers late at night when everyone else was asleep. She would return only at dawn, silent, with empty eyes. Mi Hyang never asked what happened there. Mi Ok never told. But sometimes Mi Hyang noticed bruises on her wrists, finger marks that she tried to hide under long sleeves. Sometimes Mi Ok walked strangely, carefully, as if every step caused her pain. Once, in a rare moment of openness, Mi Ok said, "You and I will live very lonely lives. We've seen too much. They'll never truly let us go." Her voice sounded infinitely sad. She was a good person, despite everything. Mi Hyang still thinks about her and hopes she somehow survived. The night banquets. Kim Jong-il's banquets began after midnight and continued until dawn. This wasn't a whim, it was a way of life. The leader slept during the day and stayed awake at night, and his entire court adapted to this inverted schedule. Picture a vast hall filled with tables of food. Not just food, delicacies from around the world, flown in by plane specially for this dinner. Pounds of beluga caviar, the kind that costs thousands of dollars for a small tin in the West. Live lobsters, their claws still moving. Sashimi from fish that had been swimming in a tank an hour ago. French wines and aged cognacs. Kim Jong-il was one of the world's largest private importers of Hennessy. Shark fins, the leader's favorite delicacy, especially certain parts of the shark considered a powerful aphrodisiac. At the tables sat generals and party officials, the regime's elite. all decorated with medals, all tense, all afraid of saying a wrong word or looking the wrong way. One false move, and tomorrow you might be in a camp, or simply disappear. And the girls from the Pleasure Brigade served this feast, pouring wine, making sure glasses were never empty, serving dishes with perfect bows, dancing and singing when Kim commanded, massaging the shoulders of tired generals. Kim loved to drink. When he got drunk, his mood became unpredictable. Sometimes he would become sentimental. He might even cry listening to some sad Russian song. And sometimes he would become playful. There was one game he particularly loved. A card game where the loser had to remove an article of clothing. One piece for each loss. And the rules were the same for everyone, whether you were a general or a girl from the brigade. Mi Hyang saw elderly military commanders, war heroes, division commanders, sitting in their underwear, red with shame and alcohol. She saw girls from her group standing completely naked before laughing officials, covering themselves with their hands and praying for the game to end. And Kim Jong-il sat at the head of the table, sipping cognac from a crystal glass and watching. He loved power. He loved seeing people humiliate themselves at his slightest whim. This gave him more pleasure than any food or drink. There were other entertainments. After particularly drunken nights, the men would make bets. The loser had to... No. Mi Hyang doesn't describe these things in detail even years later. She says only that by morning, some girls couldn't walk properly. And some cried into their pillows until the next evening and long after. When Kim got especially drunk, he would become, as he himself put it, a little mischievous. He might grab a girl he liked by the hand, pull her close, sit her on his lap, stroke her head, run his hand down her back, her thigh. With Mi Hyang, he usually just talked and held her hands. She was still a student who hadn't completed the full course of training. "You're still too young," he told her once, breathing alcohol fumes right in her face. "But when you turn 20, then you and I will have a very different conversation." Mi Hyang understood perfectly what he meant, and every day she prayed that she would never turn 20 in this place. Question for you. How many girls do you think have passed through the Kim's palaces in the 70 years of the regime's existence? How many of them are still there right now, without hope of escape, without a voice, without a name? Write your thoughts in the comments. The Fall. For 2 years, Mi Hyang lived in this world. For 2 years, she danced at banquets, smiled at drunken generals, kept silent about what she saw. She learned not to think, not to feel, just to exist. It was the only way to survive. And then, everything collapsed in an instant. One night, guards woke her up. They ordered her to get dressed and follow them. No explanations. She was brought to a gray building with no windows, clearly not a palace, but something between a barracks and a prison. There, in an empty room with a single light bulb on the ceiling, an officer read her the sentence. Her family, father, mother, younger sister, was accused of treason against the state. All arrested. The sentence, execution by firing squad. Mi Hyang still doesn't know what this treason was supposed to be. Maybe her father said something wrong at work and someone informed on him. Maybe a neighbor decided to settle a score and wrote an anonymous letter. In North Korea, you don't need evidence. Suspicion is enough. A single word in the wrong place is enough. She was held in a cell for several days. No food, no water, just concrete walls and her own thoughts. She was certain they would execute her too. She almost welcomed it. After everything she had seen and experienced in those 2 years, death seemed almost like a release. But then the cell door opened, and an officer entered with a paper in his hand. "The dear leader has ordered that you not be touched. You are free." Mi Hyang didn't understand at first. Why? Why had he spared her when he had destroyed her entire family? Maybe he liked her. Maybe he had some plans for her. Maybe he simply forgot to give the order for her execution, among thousands of other matters. Or maybe it was just another game, Minnie, to see what she would do with her freedom. Either way, Mi Hyang found herself on the street, with new documents, with orders to remain silent for the rest of her life about everything she had seen. She had survived, but her family, Minnie, her mother who had run after the car, her father, her sister, Minnie, they were all dead. Because of her. Because she happened to be too beautiful on the day the officers came to her class. "Perhaps I owe him my life," she would say later. And this thought haunts her to this day, more terrifying than any nightmare. The escape. For the following months, Mi Hyang existed like a ghost, formally free but under constant surveillance. She worked at some factory, returned to an empty apartment, lay on her bed and stared at the ceiling until dawn. Not living, Minnie, just waiting. She knew her family was dead, knew her former life had been destroyed forever, and knew that sooner or later they would come for her again. When they decided she knew too much, when they decided her silence was unreliable, when they simply remembered she existed. The decision to escape came gradually. In North Korea, even thinking about escape is a crime punishable by death. But Mi Hyang had nothing left to lose. Her family was gone. Her past was gone. She had no future in this country. She doesn't reveal the details of her escape to this day. Not because she fears for herself, Minnie, because she fears for those who helped her. For the guides who smuggle people across the border for money. For the strangers who gave her food or shelter, risking their own lives. The path out of North Korea leads through China, and this path is full of dangers, especially for young women. Chinese border guards catch refugees and send them back to the DPRK, Minnie, to certain execution. And those who manage to avoid the guards often fall into the hands of human traffickers. Women are sold to brothels or forced into marriage with Chinese peasants in remote villages. Mi Hyang went through a great deal on this journey. Things she cannot speak about. Things that still haunt her dreams and wake her screaming. But she survived. She made it to South Korea. For the first time in her life, she was truly free. A new life and old shadows. Today, Mi Hyang lives in Seoul, an ordinary apartment in an ordinary neighborhood, an ordinary job. From the outside, a completely ordinary life of an ordinary woman. But every day she checks whether she's being followed. Every time the phone rings from an unknown number, her heart stops. She involuntarily scrutinizes every Asian man on the street. Could he be an agent from Pyongyang? When her story was published on the blog of Defector Ju Sung-ha, it was read by nearly 8 million people. It was the first detailed account of the Pleasure Brigades from a first-hand witness. The world finally learned the truth about what happens behind the gilded doors of North Korean palaces. And immediately, the threats began. Phone calls promising to find and kill her. Letters with detailed descriptions of what they would do to her. Surveillance. Sometimes Mi Hyang noticed the same people near her home for several days in a row. South Korean authorities advised her to stay silent. They said they couldn't guarantee her safety. Ju Sung-ha, the journalist who published her interview, also receives death threats every day. But Mi Hyang decided to keep speaking, because the world must know. Because right now, at this very moment, there are girls in the North, just like she once was. 15-year-old schoolgirls being selected like cattle. being taught to smile and endure, being forced to sign oaths in their own blood. The Pleasure Brigades still exist today. Kim Jong-il died in 2011, but his son, Kim Jong-un, continues the tradition of his father and grandfather. According to South Korean intelligence, the young dictator has recruited a new batch of girls for his harem. Younger, more beautiful, more submissive. History repeats itself, and it will keep repeating as long as this regime exists. Finale. Mi Hyang's story began with her mother's scream and a black car taking her away from everything she knew and loved. She never learned where her parents were buried, never learned what happened to her younger sister Inye, that annoying little troublemaker who used to steal her things. Their graves, Inye if they even exist, Inye are somewhere in a country to which Mi Hyang will never return. Sometimes at night, she dreams of that spring day, her mother running after the car, her face growing smaller in the rear window, falling to her knees in the middle of the road, the car turning the corner. Every time, Mi Hyang wakes up screaming. Every time, it takes her several minutes to remember where she is, that she's safe, that she's free. But she will never be truly free. Kim Jong-il gave her a new name and took everything else. His regime destroyed her family. His system broke something inside her that no amount of therapy can ever fix. She survived. That's already more than most can say. But part of her will forever remain there, Inye, in that underground palace with its 50-meter pool and the dictator's portrait on the bottom. In those night banquets where drunken generals played strip poker. In that room where Mi Ok went and came back with bruises on her wrists. And as long as North Korea exists, as long as the Pleasure Brigades exist, as long as 15-year-old girls are taken from their schools and driven away in black cars toward a fate they cannot imagine, Inye, Mi Hyang's story will repeat itself. Again and again and again. In our next video, we'll tell the story of Kim Jong-il's bodyguard, Inye, a man who guarded the dictator's bedroom for 10 years and knows what happened there after the lights went out and the doors closed. See you then.